It's time for another episode of the Cattle Innovation Station podcast, and we're excited and ready for another great episode. In this episode, we're going to discuss AgriLife Extension and the beef cattle short course. So get ready because this is going to be a great, detailed episode. Welcome to the Cattle Innovation Station podcast,
bringing you the innovative new ways of the cattle industry.
We're your hosts, Baxter Whitworth and Paul Hayes. Together, we're going to be interviewing leaders within the cattle industry.
Here on this podcast, our focus is honoring God and innovating the cattle industry. Get ready to listen, learn, and laugh as we help innovate the cattle industry.
Let's get innovating. Have you been looking for a place to buy top quality AI sire semen or collectible of your own? Well, look no further than Elgin Breeding Services. Located in Elgin, Texas, Elgin Breeding Service is not only one of the best breeding services in the business, but also has superior customer service. Contact them at ebsbull@elginbreedingservices.com or by phone at 512-285-2019. Again, that's 512-285-2019. And visit their website at elginbreedingservice.com. All right, Dr. Cleere, welcome back. We're glad to have you. So, first thing we want to talk about is AgriLife Extension. You're a beef cattle specialist with AgriLife Extension Station and College Station, and so you're definitely a great person to talk about this. So, before we talk any further about AgriLife Extension, what is the goal of A&M AgriLife Extension?
Yeah, so we're the land grant university here in the state of Texas, and so the land grant university has three components. So the teaching aspect, so that's what everybody thinks of Texas A&M is. So they're the teaching component of the three-legged stool, and so then the other component is Texas A&M AgriLife research. And so they do the research, the ag research, biomedicals research. They do a lot of research. Their goal is to look for new technology to improve the lives of Texas, United States citizens, as well as internationally. And then my component, and I work for Texas A&M AgriLife Extension, so still under the Texas A&M system. So the third leg of the stool is the extension and the outreach. So our job is to serve, first and foremost, the Texas citizens of Texas, and more specifically for me, Texas beef cattle producers, because that's my expertise there. And so we take the research and basic information and bring it to the ranchers to help them improve the profitability and ultimately the sustainability of their beef cattle operations. So that's my job. We also have an extension, a 4-H component, so a youth development component. And we take that, Baxter and Paul, we take that for granted here in the United States, what the value of 4-H is. Last week I met with the consulate out of Houston from the Philippines, and they're interested in trying to do some partnerships to improve efficiency of beef cattle production there. And they said, well, how this process of how y'all have improved everything, and how you have such a productive agriculture in the U.S. And I said, it all starts, we start them in the third grade. We start with 4-H. As they get into high school, they got the FFA and 4-H option, but we start developing the next leaders in agriculture at an early age so that we'll be prepared for the future with that. So, 4-H falls under that extension component as well. So, it's an important part of it. So, that's where I fall in, and that's, I also I have a teaching appointment in the fall as well. So I teach a beef production class for about 125 students every fall here at Texas A&M. But I love my job in extension. I mean, I originally thought that I wanted to be a researcher and teaching, but I got offered the job as an extension specialist, and every day is a different day for me, Baxter, because I started my morning off having coffee on a ranch with a rancher, trying to help him with some grazing strategies and stuff. I get to visit with you guys for a couple hours today here, and I may be on phone calls. This summer, I'll be spending a lot of time getting ready for the Texas A&M Beef Cattle Short Course. So that's my job, helping people, and I love it.
Right, and we'll talk about the short course in just a little bit, but you said you start us in third grade. Some of us would start in first if y'all'd let us.
That's it. Yeah, that's and we actually have the Clover
The
kids and
Clover
different
kid.
things that we try to get them involved. But it's we start creating those bright minds at an early stage. Look at you
That's right.
guys.
Yes, sir. Well, and
Yes, sir.
that's just so true with all the programs, and when it comes to that point, the it's not just the program anymore that's challenging us. Since we've been through the programs and we've been doing things, we're within our own age groups, we're challenging each other and helping each other learn, and it's a great way to connect with people um, as well as grow our leadership and knowledge. And when some international people people from other countries come to like shows, they'll come to the International Brahmin Show at Houston. That's where I've seen a lot of people, and they're a lot of times surprised about how much youth involvement there is in an open show like that, and how much we're doing in that sense as well.
Yeah, I think that's a reason we stay so far ahead of other countries is creating these young minds and thinking about the next generation.
That's right.
Absolutely. And then you talked about one of the legs of the stool is the AgriLife extension, and you talked about how they help cattle ranchers, especially you and your expertise. How do they help them on their day-to-day operation?
Yeah, I mean, I think that on a day-to-day basis, every day, every rancher, if they've got access to the internet, they've got our resources, whether it be, publications, whether it be videos on ranch TV. We have different specialists that have podcasts as well, different educational tools that are out there. And so we do, again, we have some one-on-one calls with ranchers. They're at the county level, which is the local level, and that's where your local extension agent would be. A lot of times they'll have day to day, question and answers for their producers that call in, or they may have extension meetings. They may have a couple of producer meetings, rancher meetings a year where they cover specific topics with it. And then we have here on campus, we have very specialized programs that are more state and national wide programs that ranchers come in from across Texas, across the U.S. and around the world too. So, it's interacting in different levels in different ways.
That's right. I think, you know, it doesn't have to be the same. It doesn't have to be the same way for each person. It can help people through different ways.
Yeah, and the other thing too is, Paul, that we think about most of the time as our education to help in production, but then also we're also looking at what the next problem is on the horizon. Okay, whether it's hurricanes, whether it's wildfires. A lot of discussion right now on the new
Screw.
world screwworm, and we've got in the background here. I mean, we've been meeting and thinking about how we're going to respond to help ranchers and what education is going to be necessary because that's a game changer. So it's not necessarily just how to select a bull. It's in response to problems as well. So
We will definitely talk in depth in just a second about the screwworm because that
Yeah.
is a hot topic right now. So.
If you truly want your livestock to perform at their best, make sure to contact Vance Aaron, the owner and operator of AFL Livestock Solutions. Vance specializes in MagnaWave treatments that use pulsed electromagnetic fields, or PEMF, to relieve pain, swelling, and inflammation, caused to help your livestock feel their best. In addition to livestock, Vance can also help you feel better. His treatment works great on sore muscles and joints, along with other mobility issues. His treatments are FDA approved to treat migraines. Aaron Family Livestock Solutions has helped many exhibitors make it to the backdrop with their proven MagnaWave treatments. Don't miss your next backdrop picture. Give Vance a call at 903-720-3184. Again, that's 903-720-3184. Or find them on Facebook at AFL Livestock Solutions.
Another question we wanted to ask you that it's not quite as related to your job as much, but we wanted to cover this base just to, get some information out there. What research is AgriLife currently conducting and A&M conducting to help beef industry help the beef industry continue to feed more people on less land?
Yeah. So, I mean, there's lots of different things going on. Whether it be on the genomic side, we have we've got research centers scattered across across Texas. The McGregor's Research Center. We have the research center here at Texas A&M where they're doing individual feed intakes, trying to look at ways to increase feed efficiency in cattle or things that can influence feed efficiency. Dr. Kai Poehler has spent a lot of time and continues to look at early embryonic losses in cattle. And so what causes that cow to, get bred, but then 21 to 35 days later, you're going to lose some of those. Okay. And so, what can we do to minimize that risk, or are there things that we can do that take the risk away? And you say, well, that's not that big of a deal. That cow, she'll cycle back and breed, but that's 35 days potentially. And at 2 pounds a day, that's an additional 70 pounds to that rancher. Okay. That, from that calf could have been born 35 days earlier, or it's just any of those losses. So instead of having a, 85% calf crop, if we can push that to 90%, that's a 5% over, a million head of cows. That starts to increase our production. So we're going to have to continue to improve fertility there. The days of feeding and finishing out 1,300 pound steers are probably gone. We're feeding cattle to 1,500 pounds plus now, and that is in response to the demand for beef and the lack of supply with that. And so, but are we pushing the limit there? Probably so, because we are seeing a lot of pushback from packers on cut size, portion size, and things like that. With it, so 1,500 pound animal at 1.1 inches, you're looking at about a 17, 18 inch ribeye on that. Now I know Paul could probably eat an 18-inch ribeye at an inch thick. And I could. I don't know if Baxter could though, but
Depends how hungry I am.
how hungry you are. But that's so we've kind of pushed that limit. So now I think we have to look at looking at that percent calf crop and the efficiencies there, fine tuning nutrition. We've got a project that myself and some other nutritionists are looking at, and it's, hopefully it gets funded, is an on-farm project where we're looking at individual supplementation to improve the efficiency of cattle grazing. So looking at different things and what tools are available to improve that efficiency. So there's a lot of things going on. I think we're going to have to continue to do things better, more efficient, because they're not creating any more dirt. So
That's right. And you mentioned the research center, so I looked it up, and according to AgriLife's website, there's 13 AgriLife research centers across the state of Texas. So that's pretty good.
yeah, and they're all the reason they were put there is if you look at them, they're in specific regions and they're different production systems. So you got your Overton Research Center, which is close to you, Baxter. It's going to be a different kind of a land zone, environmental conditions versus maybe the Bushland Research Center, which is in the Panhandle, does a lot of research on row crops as well as the Amarillo Research Center, as well as feedlots and stuff like that. So they're going to vary depending on what the production conditions are in those centers. And so huge resource that we have. That's another thing that I told the group from the Philippines was that we've invested a lot of time and research to improve the efficiency of production in the last 100 years.
That's right.
Absolutely. And kind of going back to the question that I asked a little bit ago, and getting information not just offline but from our local extension agents.
Mm-hmm.
They are always just a great source of knowledge to ranchers. And why is it important to have a good relationship with your local extension agent? And how can working with your local extension agent benefit you?
Yeah, so they're going to be the local contact with the ranchers, and so extension agents they're going to have a little bit of a knowledge about whatever commodities are in your area. Okay, so in Baxter's area, there's they may have knowledge, definitely would have knowledge on forages and cattle, but it also may be some knowledge on timber or different things. So they have some basic knowledge to help that producer, and those that are many of them based on where they are, they can be a huge resource and provide that. But if they're stumped and they say, whoa, that's an issue I'm not sure about, I'm going to call Jason Cleere. He's the beef cattle specialist. He does this thing. And so they're kind of a who scenario. Okay, they may not know the answer, but they know how to get the resource for the rancher to help that rancher out. Whether it be, if it's a health issue, we're having cows die. The extension agents, you call the extension agent, you've talked to your veterinarian, the extension agent and veterinarian, they're probably going to call Dr. Tom Hairgrove, who's in the office right next to me. And he's our extension veterinarian, and he is one heck of a diagnostician. And so, so he's going to call Dr. Hairgrove, and he'll probably make a trip out there and boots on the ground figure it out. So the local agent is kind of that local point of contact for the rancher.
That's right. And it's always great to have someone that, knows your area, even knowing the local vet in that area, local feed store in that area. That's a great, because hopefully, your extension agent will kind of know that. And so just them being able to tell you exactly for your area what's going to be best for you is always great in terms of being able to help you out in your specific needs.
Absolutely.
EP Cattle Company. Owned by Eddie Wilson, EP Cattle Company is home of Sir Rouse Handshake. Rouse Handshake is a sound-structured, heavy-muscle bull that is really bold-ribbed. So it comes with no surprise that he is a Fort Worth and San Antonio Junior Show Division Champion and Rio Grande Valley Open Show Division Champion. He is a grandson of BRC Noble and JDH Shank Manso, and is also a great-grandson of Mr. H. Elijah Manso. You can contact Eddie Wilson or Nicole Wilson on Facebook at EP Cattle Company. So remember, If you're looking for some well-performing, registered Brahman genetics, contact Eddie Wilson on Facebook.
So, like I promised, we're going to talk about the New World screwworm and what AgriLife Extension is doing with that. And so, you already told us that A&M AgriLife Extension is working against that in some areas. So, what exactly are y'all doing?
Yeah, so there's some things, and you probably many of our listeners have seen where when Brooke Rollins came and was hosted here on campus at our beef center. One of the reasons she was hosted here was because some of the research that AgriLife's doing, looking into that problem, as well as helping to provide solutions, whether it be to increase the capacity of creating or breeding those sterile flies and distribution, or the flip side is how can we help ranchers mitigate the consequences of if we do see an infestation of the screwworm here in Texas. And so us as beef cattle specialists, we had last week another meeting with Texas A&M Health Commission to visit with them about it. And we released a publication last week that kind of gave a basic background, but then we're also in the works of looking at, well, how can we help ranchers to begin to address some of these issues if it does happen? And whether it be, moving calving seasons to where we're calving in the colder months, how do you treat? What are things that we can do to deal with this? And we haven't had to deal with it in about 50 years now. And times are a lot different. There's a lot less labor available now than there was 50 years ago. There's a lot less cowboys out there. And when I'm saying cowboys, I'm not talking about the rodeo. I'm talking about the cowboys that help us process cattle, and that we just don't. There's not a lot of them to go back to having to ride calves on a daily or every other daily basis to look for a wound, and hopefully it doesn't have an infestation of screwworms, because they can die within 10 to 14 days of initial infestation. So yeah, it's we're doing a lot of things in the background. Baxter and Paul, I hope we're preparing and worrying about nothing.
Me too. I
So,
hope we can stop it.
yeah. So, and things like you know, putting the pressure south of us to make sure those flights that are going out that are dropping those sterilized flies, that those happen, because we got to continue to
And
beat
stay
it.
safe.
There's discussions on creating, opening back up a production facility here domestically as well. But I mean, you're looking at what we're hearing is, 2 years out before something like that would be in production to really ramp it up. So they're looking at a lot of things, and I think there's a lot of wheels turning in the background on that. But it's something that, I don't think we can be okay, everybody just panic mode, but I think we got to
Right.
be prepared, because it's going to be, I don't think it's the end of the world, okay, but I think it may change the way we think about beef cattle production over a number of years, because of it's just, we things are different than they were way back. I mean, 50 years ago, we were still feeding small square bales to cows, you know.
Right.
The round baler wasn't existent. So, yeah, so things are, definitely different times.
So I want to ask you. So what do you think the impact is of? I believe they would say that'd be about a $3 million facility that they would have to renovate and open back up,
Yeah.
versus the ivermectin, putting ivermectin in tubs. And could you kind of elaborate on that as well and talk about both?
Well, one, we're not sure, and there hadn't been some research to look at the ivermectin as a feed through product, and it would be extra label as well. So it's being used some in the fever tick area there. Okay. The other aspect is that um, getting your consumption right. But then the other question mark is, okay, so if we're continuing to feed this, now are we developing resistance to parasites and other things, which may be a bigger problem once we get past the screwworm scenario there? So I think there's some things that we have to think about. I mean, there's some assumptions, and I mean, you're looking into all of our options,
Right.
of what we can do to try to improve this. And I think there's a lot of all options are on the table, and we do have some technology now. Our ivermectins, we didn't have those years and years ago. But the other countries around the world, I mean, there are screwworms down south in some of these countries, and they just deal with them. They work their way through them. So I don't think it's the end of the world, but I do think we're going to have to rethink the way we do things. Um, it's things like Ivomec has a long range product. Well, my first thought was, man, we could put cattle on long range and protect them during the most vulnerable times. Well, the problem is the way long range works. Yeah, there's an immediate release, but then you have a delayed release down the road. So you got a gap between the initial release and the delayed release that there's no protection. So that's probably not a viable product either. So I think we have to look at and see what's going to be the best mode of action. Some people said, okay, we treat them every 2 weeks with Ivomec. Again, you get resistance. You talk about labor issues. Every time you run an animal through the chute, you increase the risk that they cut themselves or something like that. So now we create a wound. So now we got a potential problem.
Right.
Opening.
Because that's how they lay the
Yeah.
eggs.
So, I think
The
there's
larva.
things that we have to really look at, and between, extension as well as your cattlemen's organizations, there's a lot going into it right now, and a lot of concern.
Is
But I
there
don't,
any
I don't think it's the end of the world. Let me just clarify that. So don't everybody
so
go out and try to sell their cows right now.
so with the ivermectin, I've heard that it won't treat like screwworms getting in from the outside, but it will treat them from the inside. How do you think that's going to work with treating like open wounds and stuff, because I've heard that in the 70s they had to like tie up cattle and rub like a gooey black paste on them every day, and we really don't have the manpower for that. And you've
Yeah,
talked about that.
and I think that's the challenge we face, Paul, is that I think there's going to be some management strategies of cattle, of how we deal with them. Um, Try to minimize open wounds, for one. It's going to require checking cattle more. Um, Calving season, and when a calf's born, it's got an open wound. It's called its navel. So, you know, so now we start moving in calving seasons into, January, February, December, maybe, depending on what part of the state you're in. And so, those are things that where you try to mitigate the chances that we do have open wounds and some problems there. So, um, it does. I mean, I've had a lot of windshield time lately, and I'm thinking, gosh, man, this could be a game changer for us.
I have I've heard that they have to like with the navels, they would have to go out and deal with that every day. And on big ranches, I really don't know that would really how it would work, because
Yeah.
I don't know, like big ranches. Let's take the King Ranch in the 70s. They had to like go treat the navel on all their calves every day, and that was a ton of calves. And do we really have the manpower right now to do that?
Yeah, no, and the manpower, the capabilities, and so there's a lot. We've talked about absentee landowners, part-time ranchers. There's a lot of those now, a lot more of those now than there was back 50 years ago. And so, then it becomes again, how can we mitigate the risk of the screwworm. And so one way that they did back then was, okay, they had a calving season during the cold months, so that you, when you had that open navel, you didn't have your screwworm, the flies were not present at the time because of the colder weather. So those are things that again, we're not saying, all right, you need to pull your bulls right now so that you're not going to calve as we get into the spring of next year. I think it's just something we start thinking about these things. The rancher this morning, I said, we'll see what the screwworm brings. He usually he starts calving the middle of October. Okay, that's when he likes to do it. And and I said, well, if the screwworm scenario comes up, we may need to probably postpone your start of calving another month until we get cold enough weather to where we're not having to deal with it. So I think those are things that we're going to have to look at to, again, reduce the risk there.
Infinity Cattle Services, owned by Chris Shivers, is glad to be a sponsor of the Cattle Innovation Station podcast. Infinity Cattle Services, a unique, vision-driven, service-oriented company committed to developing successful revenue-producing cattle operations, is a full-service consulting and marketing firm specializing in Brahman and Brahman-influenced cattle. Contact them today to learn more about how they can assist you with locating cattle, cattle mating, sale management, marketing, communications, record keeping, data submission, and a wide array of other services. They can be reached at 713-202-1747. Again, that's 713-202-1747, or at infinitycattleservices@gmail.com. That is infinitycattleservices@gmail.com. Visit their website at infinitycattle.com or check them out on Facebook and Instagram. That's definitely good. And I also just, what do you think about, because it's my understanding that it's hard for some of the planes that are dropping the sterile flies over Mexico and South America are having some safety trouble getting over there just because of the compliance of maybe the cartel or others trying to not let those come through. What do you think the impact of having a sterile fly facility in the United States would be on helping?
Well, I mean, the challenge will still be, I mean, we want to try to keep it from getting far north, getting to us. And so then it still becomes the political aspects of that down there. And that's out of my pay grade with that. But I do think that that's why, our cattle organizations are on top of it and putting the pressure of our government officials to to say this is a big problem and we need to put the political pressure so that we can keep it from getting up here to the United States, but we can also do it to help those Mexico beef cattle producers as well, because they're ultimately being hurt by the screwworm directly, potentially, as it moves forward north, but also they're hurt because the border's closed right now. So, those are aspects that with that, if we do get the infestation here, it will definitely be critical to have a facility to release as many flies as possible to get them knocked down. And it'll take several years to do that.
Right.
So,
and I know that some people were against closing the border from imports, and I understand completely that. I know it does not help them whatsoever, and it's bad for them, but it's also bad for them if it spreads to the United States and we're having to fight off here and in Mexico. Well, then they're going to be getting a lot less help than if we're able to just fight it off and keep it quarantined in Mexico and then eventually push it out.
Yeah.
And so I think, it eventually comes around and helps both as well.
Yeah, I think that the one thing too, we focused a lot on beef cattle because that's what I'm talking about. But the screwworm is not specific to beef cattle. It's a parasite that
Right.
affects any warm-blooded animal. So I don't think it kills wild hogs, though. It's not very effective. No, I'm just kidding. But they are supposedly resilient to them in South America. But our wildlife, you think about what our deer population is now compared to what it was 50 years ago. So wildlife can be dramatically affected. Pets, our 4-H projects, humans, can potentially. There's been cases of human infestations of the screwworm too, and so those are things that we have to be very careful of. That it's not just cattle, it's all of our lives are affected by it.
That's true. And then, is there any other kinds of research that's part of stopping the New World screwworm from entering the United States?
I think the big the sterile flies worked. It was very effective to stamp out the screwworms, and it can be effective again. It's got to get done with that. And some of the the problems south of us that have prevented the release of those flies in those areas is the real reason why we're even facing this possibility right now.
That's right. That's true. But I think, it's in God's hands, but we have to act on it. And I think hopefully we'll get it contained from coming in the United States, and that'll just make it easier to eradicate it completely. Do you see that being possible, to eradicate the New World screwworm completely, or is that something you don't see?
Well, I've never seen it in my lifetime, Baxter, and I'm 51 years old. Okay, so I think it can be. It definitely, if we can keep it south and keep it out of the United States, there's no doubt. The sterile fly deal worked, and it can work again with that. It's just very unfortunate that the situation down south. Not necessarily the ranchers' faults down there, but the situation down there is what's caused this problem to resurface again.
All right, well, that sounds good, and I think it's about time we wrap this episode up. I think we may even end up with a 4th episode with you, Dr. Cleere, but we had a great time talking about AgriLife Extension. We'll talk about beef cattle short course next time. I had a great time. Thank you for coming on. Paul, anything we're missing?
No, we're going to have a great conversation about the beef cattle short course next. So make sure to listen to the next episode.
All right, sounds good. Until next time, keep innovating the cattle industry. Signing off.
Hello, guys. Thank you for listening to the Cattle Innovation Station podcast. We want to make this podcast better. So if you would, please like this episode and leave us feedback in the comment section. Something else that helps make this podcast better is when you respond to the polls. So if you're able, please respond to our polls. Help us make this podcast as good as possible. Thank you, God bless, and have a good day.
Thank you for listening to the Cattle Innovation Station podcast.
We hope you enjoyed the show.
We're your hosts, Baxter Whitworth
and Paul Hayes.
Remember our key verse, Proverbs 16:3.
Commit to the Lord whatever you do, and He will establish your plans.
Thank you for listening.